Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Hi, I'm Chris William, moderator for Carolina Business Review, and this week we start with part 2 of a special dialogue we did with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. It was done at the Westin Hotel in Charlotte with 3 CEOs. They are Marvin Ellison, CEO of Lowe's, Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, and Duke Energy CEO Lynn Good. So we begin with part 2 of their thoughts on where we might be headed this year. We start now.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. This is a Carolina Business Review special presentation of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance 2022 Economic Outlook, featuring Lynn Good, Chair, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Duke Energy; Brian Moynihan, Chair and Chief Executive Officer at Bank of America; and Marvin Ellison, President and Chief Executive Officer of Lowe's. And now, Chris William.
Brian, what's the central bank going to do? What is the Fed going to do?
Which one?
Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me that question.
What's the Fed going to do about liquidity, about low rates, about unemployment?
So the question, and you've heard Chair Powell in his Humphrey Hawkins or CARES Act testimony just a couple weeks ago, and we had our Federal Advisor Council meeting with him, and you know, he's clear, it's time to start to take the accommodation out of the system, and first is the balance sheet size and then rates. And the reason why you're doing that is you have to step back. We have had a heck of a long-term problem avoided by really going after the short term. Fiscally, prior administration, this administration, flooding a lot of money into the system. Monetary policy, low rates, building the balance sheet, and then, you know, frankly, private America also stepping up and no layoffs here, just doing a lot of stuff to help our employees stay safe that added to it. And so you had a 30% downdraft in the economy coupled by recovery. And so what's the Fed going to do? To me, it's a fairly straightforward thought process. In 2019, the economy was X size. It is now as big as it was then. The unemployment rate was 3.6. It's now 4.2. Both those are full employment. If we're not at full employment, then we would have a lot less job openings, let's just say it. So you have full employment, right? But the reality is the customers are spending money. 2 million people went through TSA the other day, et cetera, travel. So what would the Fed do? They have to take the accommodation out, and they have to slowly take it out because the inflation is in the system. The question whether the expectations will continue on. And you know, so that's what they got to do. Now the question is how and when and how they do it and how they do it without pushing the economy too hard into recession. And they've got to do their job, which is to manage that debate and manage that outcome. And you know, they've been pretty clear, and they've got another meeting coming up, I guess, next week, and they'll be more clear about it. But the first thing to do is start to take the balance sheet down. And then second thing is to raise rates. And the market has them raising rates, you know, second quarter next year into third quarter, 3 or 4 times, et cetera. But if you ask me personally, you know, the conditions of the economy are strong enough, absent what this variant does, that, you know, it's time for the Fed to move back and let the natural economy take hold. But you don't have to just think about 2019. We all felt pretty good, and the Fed funds rate was at 2. The long-term rate was around 2. Why would it be different than that? Especially if the economy is expected to grow twice as much. And the risk is if you don't start doing that, you can have inflation, and you have inflation, you can have continued expectation of inflation. and that's difficult to manage.
Lynn, interest rate sensitive industry, no doubt.
For sure.
I know you watch interest rates and monetary policy. What do you think's coming, and how do you prepare for it?
You know, I would say, Chris, kind of similar to what Brian's comments are, you know, we live through many economic seasons, right? And so rising interest rates, some inflation, tight supply chain, tight labor market are the headwinds that we could point to. But we also have tailwinds. We have a growing economy. We have growing economic development. We have growing energy use. We have the demands for transforming the energy industry. And so I think all of us are trying to figure out how to continue to position our business, despite the headwinds, to keep going in a way that makes sense for our customers and our investors. And so, you know, we're coming out of a pandemic. If we had been sitting here in January of 20, we didn't know pandemic was a headwind, but it was. And we adjusted and adapted, and we kept going. And the same is the case now. We've been watching the interest rate environment for some time. We finance a lot of debt. I mean, we spend on capital alone somewhere around $10 to $11 billion a year. Half of it's financed by debt in a general sense. And so we kind of dollar average our way into interest rates. We try to take advantage of as much commercial paper and short-term rates as we can. Financing over a 30-year period, interest rates are still very low. Mm-hmm. And so finding a way to adapt is just part of the job, and we will address those headwinds as we do every year, and also look at the good things that are going on in a way that we can take advantage of that and grow our business.
Marvin, obviously looking at retail and wholesale sales, that's an important indicator for you. When you hear what Brian and Lynn just talked about when it comes to interest rates and what's coming, how do you look at it? What's important to you? What do you watch to make sure that you are staying where you need to be?
Well, an interesting statistic, 2/3 of the sales at Lowe's are from repair and maintenance activity. So
still now, as it was?
Still today. So if you think about an appliance breaking down, your roof leaking, something occurring that requires you to fix it, that's 2/3 of our sales. So we're not necessarily in any new home construction. So the correlation is very modest, meaning interest rates and any type of decline in demand in our business. What really drives demand in home improvement is what's occurring now, and that is in the U.S., 50% of the existing homes are over 40 years old. And anything over 40 years old starts to break down. We all can attest to that.
Speak for yourself, Mark. Come on.
20 years old, Myron.
Yeah. So anytime you have an aging housing stock, that is a great predictor for business demand for us. And the fact that supply demand from housing versus demand for housing versus supply of existing homes on the market, Charlotte is a classic example of what's happening around the country. You know, I moved here 3 years ago looking for a new home. We couldn't find what we were looking for, and so we bought an existing home and we remodeled it. That is exactly, you know, that correlates our business model. If someone, you know, constructs a new home, Lowe's gets very, very little of that demand in sales just because we're not in the new home construction business. So I would say interest rates are important, obviously, because it's going to impact the balance sheet of the consumer, and if they don't feel good about their financial position, or they feel as though that they're going to be at risk for future earnings or future value in their home, then that may have some indirect correlation to our revenue and demand. But overall, historically, is the age of housing stock, is home price appreciation, and it's a supply-demand ratio of existing homes, because we want you to stay in your existing home, and we want you to invest in that home versus going to buy a new home.
And not looking for a leading answer from any of you on that, Brian, but you've seen a lot of you've all in a lot of markets. But Brian, especially you, and you've been now running head of Bank of America for quite a while. When you look at the southern region, like Charlotte, Raleigh, and other places, Charleston, specifically Charlotte, since we're sitting right here, there is a level of in-migration and growth that'll, in my term, bail it out, even in a bad economy. Is that wrong to think that way, and/or does Charlotte plan accordingly?
Well, I think, look, the cooperation of the business community with the political side, the rules, regulations, the law, the availability, all things Marvin talked about is stellar here, and that's why the world has this community growing faster than the average community in the United States and the United States growth rate. And it doesn't mean we're perfect, and we got lots of issues we're trying to figure out, and we got the work we work on the CLC and other groups with the reattaching of the tens of thousands of people who we need to get better jobs and more career paths. All that stuff is work, but that's not unique here. But I think this community benefits by a great business climate, a great business group that works together with the alliance here and all the different groups, an understanding in the governmental sector that population, jobs, companies are linked and they're not unlinked, and then tax policy and stuff that's constructive. And when you go to other areas, there are other areas that are very aggressive right now, Texas and Florida and places like that, but there are other areas that are just not. And so I think we should be careful to keep good things going. Now, on top of that, the schools have got to be in great shape. They got to be able to receive the people. All the themes that we all know about and talk about, and the opportunity question that arose out of the Chetty study that got a lot of our attention, right. And got us after some things. Those are serious questions that you want to deal with. But the nice thing is we're starting from an expanding pie. When I go to other parts of the country and talk about the idea that you have to plan in the schools, the growth here, there's a lot of the places the school system just keeps shrinking, and that's a harder management task. And so I think let's just take advantage of what we have and not worry about the rest of the country and just do a good job, and that'll just keep attracting people.
Is there, Charlotte had the wind at its back, clearly. Are there things, though, that we could lose sight of if we don't address around growth and development in Charlotte? Are we checking all the boxes that we need to be checking?
Chris, I would say a couple of things. This is a terrific place to live and work. I think we all appreciate that. I think it's important when it comes to attracting talent, when we attract businesses. I know the Charlotte Business Alliance has a big role to play in that. But I think another thing that is important about the region is the civic leadership. Brian talked about it. I think the civic leadership and maintaining that civic leadership so that the community is addressing issues that are important to our customers, our employees, our community leaders, whether it's education, workforce development, racial equity. I think all of those things require our attention. And as we think about Charlotte, I'm proud of the fact that the business community is so closely involved with that. There's always more work to do, though. Mm-hmm. And I think maintaining that focus on civic engagement at the same time we're enjoying the benefits of the region is important. Mm-hmm. And I would also say that continuing to invest around education, continuing to invest in infrastructure so that we're keeping pace with our population growth, continuing to look ahead and plan for what 10 years, 15 and 20 years look like is important for all of us to do. At the rate of population growth and other things that we see, this region is just going to continue to blossom. So let's enjoy the good things and let's work on keeping the civic leadership and the strength of the community education system, et cetera, going.
Would you characterize it that way? Is it civic leadership? Is there one thing that you look at, Mr. Ellison, that you say, well, we got to get this one right. We got to do this.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I look at the mayor's racial equity initiative. Malcolm Comey led that. Mayor Lowe's vision around it. Many of us in this room as companies supported it in a large way. I think that's important because that is something that we have to address, within the city. We've talked in the business community a lot about mobility and how we can improve the mobility in Charlotte and some of the things we can do as business leaders to work, with the city and with the county in various, degrees to try to help move these initiatives forward. I think that's a big part of it. But I agree with what Brian said. I've lived in a lot of major cities, and I would say that the business community in Charlotte works better together and works better with the city and the city officials than any place I've ever lived before. And I think that's a credit to the mayor. I think it's a credit to Mayor Lyles. I think it's a credit to her administration. I think it's a credit to a lot of the business organizations and the CEOs and the leaders in this city that's taken the lead. Both Lynn and Brian have both led, large business groups here in this city, and I think that means a lot. So I think it's all of those things. I don't think it's just one thing, but the city is moving in the right direction. I think we should feel good about that, but we can't rest on our laurels. We have to be aggressive. We have to address the issues that need addressing, and it's going to take a team effort and a collaboration between all of us to make this a positive story.
So 5 years ago, whenever the Chetty work came out on the opportunity, and so when we travel around, and I'm sure Lynn and Marvin have some of the same thing, the approach this community took to take it head on and say, we don't want to be there, what are we going to do? And is it all perfect? Fine, but it's action. It's not debating, it's not, and the clear-mindedness which Andrea and others had brought to the table, and then all of us sat there and said, okay, let's try to figure out what we can do. And we're ahead of a lot of places figuring that out. And how do we know that? Well, we're all involved in the 110 initiative, for example, and they're using the patterns that we did here, the straightforward thought process, which is how do we create opportunity for people, because employers can promise jobs, and you go from jobs to skills to programs, not the other way around. So we're hiring people, and that doesn't exist in other communities. By the way, we're trying to populate in other communities, and that's one of the things we're trying to do, is because we think the business community owes this to every community, but a lot of other communities, it kind of goes on around you. And I think the clear-mindedness which this community took that on, and then even before that with the shootings and the riots we had around some of the stuff, and the over-policing, and thinking about it, and just sitting down and saying, we got to figure this out. That is, an extremely constructive place to business do. But you have to be careful, because the brand here is, you always got to keep your brand moving forward, because a lot of other people after you. There's a lot of aggressive communities out there that promise a lot of things to companies that we have to be mindful of. That you got to have good schools. Communities have to be safe. You got to have a good relationship between the government and the private sector, and the private sector has to be able to tell the tale that it's all good. It's good and growing, because if they don't, it's not that people leave. That's a mistake many politicians make. It's that people don't start. So you're in a search to locate 1,000 employees. People just go off the list because the people looking at it say it's too hard to figure that out. That's what you lose. You don't lose people. For us to pull up out of here or other companies, that'd be impossible. But the real question is, you lose the next company, and I think the recovery we had from those issues, I think, showed that we were willing, and that's why you're continuing to see the influx.
We've talked about the mayor a couple times. I want to make sure, is the mayor here by any chance? Just want to give her an opportunity. Where? Is she there? Mayor Lyles? Thank you. I wanted to make sure we're talking about you in the third person, and I know she was very emotional, rightly so, when it came to the amount of money that was initially pledged, $250 million. And I want to spend just a little bit of time on this. How much time do we have, Bob Jones, by the way? Yeah, I can't read that. Oh, that's the countdown clock. Oh my gosh. Okay.
It's not 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah. I work for Wells Fargo.
They may feel like that, but we're.
Marvin, 5 years from now, with $250 million pledged for the mayor's racial equity initiative, 5 years from now, what does success look like? How does that deployed?
Well, I think success is progress. We just want to see forward movement. There's a lot that needs to be done, but there's a lot that needs to be done in a lot of cities. I give the mayor credit for at least having the vision to have this initiative in place, and then to get the business and the civic support around it to make it a reality. So I think this is a great starting point. Yeah. And as long as we work together collectively, and we support the initiative, and we do our part, I mean, this is a collective effort of not waiting for someone to get something done, but to take the initiative. The message I gave to my team in the midst of all of the social unrest and all the flurry of activities that companies were motivated to do because of the issues we were dealing with, I just told them, talk less and do more. We don't have to tell everything we're doing. Let's let our actions speak louder than our words. There are a lot of press releases, a lot of speeches being given. The question is, what are you actually doing? And so I'm confident with the leadership of Mayor Lyles and her team and this business community that we'll get things done. So in 5 years, I'm very confident that we'll feel great about the results.
We didn't get a chance to really unpack this, and I hate we didn't. We trying to put 10 pounds of information in a 5-pound bag. Lynn, you're going to get the last question, diversity, equity, inclusion. Tragic death of George Floyd and those things that followed awakened and reawakened for many people what DEI really does mean. It's not just a silo. How have you embraced what DEI means? What value does it bring to an organization like Duke, and what does it mean to you personally?
You know, Chris, we have had a long-standing commitment to diversity and equity at Duke. And I would say to you, the business that we run, although it looks easy to all of you, you flip the switch and here it goes, it's a very complicated business. And you have to have diverse points of view at the table, diverse backgrounds in order to solve big, complex problems. So we've been a believer in diverse points of view for a very long time. I do think 2020 and the murder of George Floyd was a catalyst for us to really step back and say, we've believed it for a long time, but have we really made the progress that a company of our scale should be making? And it's given us encouragement to spend more time with employees, more conversations, more leadership development, more sponsorship, more reaching out to develop a pipeline. It's also had us speaking very directly to our suppliers. We believe deeply in supplier diversity, but we want them to believe as deeply as we do, and we expect them to show us what their efforts are in order to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then building on what Marvin talked about, we've been very active, not only in the mayor's very clear vision for the future, but in trying to take our view of equity and inclusion into the community. And I think one of the things the mayor has drawn our attention to is Johnson C. Smith, corridors of opportunity, the digital divide that exists in our area, and we are putting specific funding and volunteer and leadership into those initiatives. And my hope is that in 5 years we have a stronger, historically black college in our community. We have corridors of opportunity that have created jobs and investment in parts of our city that have been left behind, and that we don't have a digital divide. The next time we need to send young people home for remote schooling, they go with ease and it all works beautifully. So we're a believer at Duke Energy in diversity and inclusion, and our work is never over, but we are committed to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chris, if I could just add one thing, and
Please.
the one thing that we tried to do with the onset of the George Floyd murder and tragedy is we just have to create a comfortable environment to have uncomfortable conversations. And that's not a play on words. We have to have environments where supervisors and leaders can feel confident and comfortable that they can talk to a teammate, an employee that may be of a different religion, a different ethnicity, a different gender, and not be so afraid of offending. Because sometimes we're so afraid of offending, we don't even talk to each other. And so we're not learning. And I think that's one of the things that we try to facilitate is let's just teach people how to have a proper conversation with their team to understand how they're feeling and what they're frustrated about, and just have a form of discussion and not be so concerned that you're going to ask the wrong question in the wrong way and you're going to offend someone. And that was a huge issue within our company that we're trying to continue to figure out ways to make it less burdensome.
So it's interesting, Paul. So in the weekend after the George Floyd killing, I received 2,000 or 3,000 emails from our company and that asked, why can't people have the conversations we have in our company outside our company? And we had built a platform with an outsider called Courageous Conversation starting, 7, 8 years ago. It's a trademark name, believe it or not, because and this was all about, ethnicity, race, and we had black executives talk about, driving while black and having their kids drive and getting stopped and the issues of over-policing and stuff. So that was already going on, and 3,000, and that's why in our $1.25 billion program, which has private equity investments and MDI investments and all this other stuff, we went to the Smithsonian, and Lonnie Bunch, who ran the National Museum of African American History Culture, now runs the whole Smithsonian, and we gave him a foundational gift of $25 million immediately and said, you've got to build a platform, because when I was talking to other business leaders around this, they said, we don't have a platform. I said, well, build a platform for people to have those conversations Marvin's talking about. And that kind of understanding that comes from big companies and just the willingness to take on and scratch the scab off and let the conversation roll, and you need some professional structure around it to make it work. is as important, I think, what's come out of this horrible situation in the George Floyd killing and a double pandemic and all the words people use and anything else. And I felt it when I took a walk with somebody at a house in Kiel, and a colleague was there who was on the board with me. And after 2 hours of walking, I could understand better as a successful black CEO what he was feeling, and understood the difference, and said, you know what, we got to help other companies push this harder. That's a piece that we can't forget when we go through all this, is that we need, and that's a little bit what we found out in this community and the opportunity and thinking about that. If you ask me, anything that destroys the fabric, if we worry about, is to make sure that we're seen as a leader in all this in this community, not a laggard. And that's just something we just got to stay on all the time. And the mayor's initiatives and JCSU and the opportunity stuff that we've created, and pre-K and advocating for digital divide, and us, this is all part of that. But also, don't forget the conversation is just as important.
This is going to sound patronizing. It's not. It's genuine, and I think I speak for everybody in this room. Thank you for your leadership. Truly, all of you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you.